The jar looks harmless. Just a little clay container, cracked around the edges, the kind of thing you'd imagine holding spices or maybe cheap wine. But inside was history's quietest killer. A pinch of powder, a splash of liquid, something so small you could slip it in a cup, and by the time the drinker realized, it was already too late. That's the thing about poison. It doesn't roar onto the stage like a sword or an army. It whispers. It waits. And when it strikes, there's no dramatic clash of steel, no battle cries echoing through valleys, just silence. A slow collapse. A hand slipping from a goblet. Eyes rolling back. Done. History changes, and almost no one sees it coming. Weapons in most of history were obvious. Arrows, spears, cannons. You could point to them and say, yeah, that's what killed him. But poison? That's a different kind of scary. You can't see it. You can't hear it. Half the time, you don't even taste it. And maybe that's why people feared it so much. It was invisible power, tucked into a vial, hidden in a sleeve, waiting for the right moment to ruin someone's evening or their dynasty. Imagine being a ruler back in the day. You've got enemies everywhere. Some want your throne, some want your land, some just don't like your face. And the scary part is, you can build walls to stop armies. You can carry swords to fend off assassins. But how do you protect yourself from a poison drink? What if your favorite dish was secretly your last supper? Suddenly, every bite feels like a gamble. Every sip feels like Russian roulette, except you're playing with stew. This paranoia shaped entire kingdoms. Kings and queens hired tasters, unlucky souls whose job was to eat and drink everything before the ruler did. Imagine being that guy. On one hand, you're close to royalty. On the other hand, you're basically a crash test dummy for soup. Congratulations, you survived lunch. Here's dinner. Good luck. But it wasn't just the rulers who had to worry. Poison made its way into everyday feuds too. A jealous rival, a bitter neighbor, a wife who had just about enough of her husband. In some cultures, poison became the weapon of the powerless, the one way someone small could strike back at someone untouchable. No army? No problem. Just learn your way around a few toxic herbs. And let's be clear, nature is packed with killers. The ancient world didn't need labs or secret formulas to make deadly concoctions. Plants alone offered more than enough. Hemlock, nightshade, aconite, all pretty enough to decorate a garden, all deadly enough to ruin your whole week. Add in venoms from snakes, frogs, and insects, and you've got a recipe book that could outdo any medieval cookbook. Except, a little less appetizing.
What's fascinating is how early humans discovered all this. Who was the first unlucky soul who thought, hey, I wonder if I can eat this weird shiny berry? Spoiler, they couldn't. But someone nearby noticed the effect, remembered it, and boom, another entry in the secret handbook of poisons. Over generations, trial and error turned into actual knowledge. What healed, what killed, what did both depending on the dose. Because the line between medicine and poison, razor thin. That thin line gave poison a strange, almost mystical vibe. In many cultures, people didn't see it as just chemistry. They saw it as magic, something supernatural. How could a pinch of powder bring down a warrior stronger than 10 men? It had to be sorcery, right? So poisoners became figures of fear and mystery. Witches, alchemists, shadowy figures with recipes scribbled in secret. Whether they were real scientists or just good at bluffing, one thing was certain: they terrified everyone. And yet, for all the fear, people couldn't resist using it. Poison was the ultimate shortcut. Why fight a war when you could slip something into your enemy's drink? Why challenge a rival in the open when you could end them quietly at dinner? It was cheaper, faster, and left fewer witnesses. That's efficiency history rarely talks about, but it explains why poison shows up everywhere, in myths, legends, and real court documents. Think about how many famous stories hinge on poison. Socrates drinking hemlock, Cleopatra testing toxins on prisoners, the Roman emperors hiring professional poisoners almost as if it was just another job on payroll. And those are just the ones we know about. For every famous case, there are hundreds lost to time, buried in whispers, erased by history's habit of keeping secrets. Here's the chilling part. We've found traces. Archaeologists dig up goblets with chemical fingerprints. Hair from royal mummies still carries toxins in their strands. Even little jars buried in tombs hold powders so deadly that researchers won't even open them. It's like the past is still breathing through these containers, waiting for someone careless enough to take a sniff. So why start here with the idea of poison as a silent weapon? Because it sets the stage. Everything that comes after, the deadly herbs of Greece, the poison maidens of India, the Roman assassins, the Chinese elixirs, all of it comes back to this one truth. Poison isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It waits in the shadows, letting fear do most of the work. And maybe that's what makes it so fascinating. A sword can kill a man. Poison can kill a king, a family, a whole dynasty, and no one has to raise their voice. That's power. That's the silent weapon. So as we step into this story, keep one thing in mind. History wasn't only written with ink and blood. Sometimes it was written with powders and potions, stirred quietly into someone's drink. And if you're watching this right now with a cup of tea in your hand, maybe give it a little sniff, just in case.
If you want to know where the world's first poison labs were, forget secret castles or smoky alchemists' dens. Just look outside. The forest, the garden, even the little patch of weeds growing by the roadside. Nature has always been the best and most terrifying pharmacist. Every culture figured this out. Long before chemistry sets and microscopes, people experimented with what the earth had to offer. Some roots healed, some leaves soothed, and some berries? Well, those berries didn't end well for the person who ate them. That's how the great library of poisons was written, not in books, but in bruises, fevers, and last words. Take hemlock, for example, a tall, innocent-looking plant with tiny white flowers. It doesn't scream danger. In fact, it looks like something you might stick in a vase at a summer picnic. But hemlock was notorious. A sip of it was enough to paralyze muscles, shutting down the body one careful step at a time until silence. It's the same plant that ended the life of one of history's most famous philosophers, Socrates. Imagine that, one of the greatest minds in the world, defeated by a flower. Then there's nightshade, also called belladonna. The name literally means beautiful woman in Italian, because women in Renaissance times once used drops of it to make their eyes look larger and more attractive. Romantic, right? Except for the small detail that belladonna is one of the deadliest plants on the planet. A few berries can kill a child. A handful can kill an adult. Fashion has always been risky, but that's next level. And we can't forget aconite, known as wolf's bane, or sometimes the queen of poisons. Ancient hunters supposedly smeared it on arrow tips to take down animals or enemies fast. Even touching the plant can cause tingling and numbness. Imagine realizing your fingers are going numb just from brushing against a leaf. That's not gardening, that's Russian roulette with plants. But plants were only half the pharmacy. Animals played their part too. Snakes offered venom that could clot your blood in seconds. Frogs in South America secreted toxins so strong that a single drop on an arrowhead could drop a jaguar. Scorpions and spiders delivered painful cocktails of neurotoxins with every sting. And let's not forget fish like the pufferfish, whose poison is 1,200 times deadlier than cyanide. One wrong bite, and you'd never have to worry about dinner again.
It's wild to think that early humans figured all this out without science labs. No goggles, no gloves, just curiosity and a lot of casualties. Someone had to be the first to say, hey, what happens if we drink this? Spoiler, not great things. But someone else was watching, taking notes and passing down the knowledge. Over generations, trial and error, mostly error, turned into recipes, secret family knowledge, whispered warnings, instructions on what to use, how much, and who not to cross.
And here's where things get interesting. Many poisons weren't just killers, they were medicines too. The difference? Dose. Foxglove, for example, contains compounds that can regulate heartbeats. Too much, and it'll stop your heart entirely. Just enough, and it might save your life. That thin line between healing and killing gave poisoners an almost godlike reputation. They didn't just know how to end a life, they knew how to save it. And that made them powerful, respected, and feared. This blurred line created a strange culture around poison. In some places, it was seen as sacred knowledge, something only priests, shamans, or healers could handle. In others, it was branded as dark magic. Think about it. You watch your neighbor drink a tea made from some weird flower, and within minutes, he's either cured of his headache or he's dead on the floor. How do you explain that without words like witchcraft? And people loved to tell stories about poison. Myths are full of them. In Greek tales, Medea brewed potions that could both heal and destroy. In Norse legend, venom dripped on Loki as punishment, burning him endlessly. Even Hercules wasn't safe. He died wearing a robe smeared with poisoned blood. These weren't just stories. They were warnings dressed up as entertainment. A reminder that the natural world had sharp teeth, and you never really knew which plant or creature was smiling at you, and which one was planning your funeral. The truth is, poisons were everywhere. Some were hidden in pretty flowers, others slithered in the grass. A few hopped through jungles or swam in rivers. The world was, and still is, a giant pharmacy of both cures and killers. Ancient people didn't just live with this knowledge, they weaponized it. They learned how to crush, boil, and distill. They figured out which parts of a plant were safe, which were deadly, and how to mix them into food, drinks, or weapons. And once that knowledge existed, you can guess what happened. Power shifted. Secrets were hoarded. Families passed down recipes like heirlooms. Imagine inheriting your grandmother's secret pie recipe, except instead of pie, it's a powder that can knock out a king. Nice family tradition. So when we talk about poison, it's not just about science. It's about fear. It's about trust. It's about the paranoia that seeps into every corner of life once you realize the world's most deadly weapons grow quietly under the sun. Anyone could learn them. Anyone could use them. And that meant everyone was a potential suspect. This is why poison wasn't just chemistry. It was power politics. It was social control. It was a way to even the playing field when brute strength or armies weren't an option. And that's why in almost every culture, the knowledge of nature's dark pharmacy became both treasured and feared. So, the next time you walk past a garden, notice the flowers, admire the leaves, but maybe don't touch everything. Because some of those innocent-looking plants, they wrote chapters of history with more force than any sword. And in the hands of someone with ambition or a grudge, they became the deadliest concoctions the world had ever seen.
If you want drama, you go to Egypt. Pharaohs, pyramids, mummies, golden tombs. But behind the glitter and grandeur, Egypt also had a darker toolkit. Oils, powders, and potions that could heal you one day and kill you the next. The land of the Nile wasn't just a cradle of civilization. It was a testing ground for some of the world's earliest chemical experiments. The Egyptians had an obsession with mixing things: herbs, minerals, animal parts, honey, wine. If it grew, glowed, or oozed, someone in a linen robe probably crushed it into paste and called it medicine. And to be fair, sometimes it worked. They used honey to clean wounds, willow bark for pain. That's aspirin in its natural form. But here's the catch. When you're experimenting with everything under the sun, sooner or later, you stumble into the dark side of the recipe book. That's where poisons crept in. Plants like mandrake, lotus, and henbane, known for their dreamy, almost psychedelic effects, could also push you into a permanent dream if you overdid it. Snake venom was studied not just as a fearsome weapon, but as a possible cure when diluted. Scorpions were burned, ground into powder, and sometimes sprinkled into brews meant to protect people from further stings. Protective? Maybe. Deadly? Definitely. Now, did Egyptians use poison for murder? Oh yes. Court intrigue was basically a full-time job. You didn't need an army to dethrone a rival, just a servant with access to the kitchen. The problem is, poison leaves fewer obvious traces than, say, stabbing someone with a bronze spear. So history gives us a lot of whispers and theories, but not always proof. Take the pharaohs, for example. Several rulers died suddenly in suspiciously mysterious circumstances. Was it illness? Or was someone slipping something extra into the royal wine? Historians are still debating. Ramses III, for instance, is suspected of being assassinated in a palace conspiracy. His throat was slashed, yes, but there are also signs of toxic substances in his body. Maybe poison came first, the knife second, just to be sure.
And then there's Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, famous for her beauty, her politics, and her, let's just say, dramatic exit. The official story? She died by letting an asp bite her, a noble death by snake, but many historians doubt it. A snake bite is messy, unpredictable, and slow. Cleopatra was too clever for that. Some believe she used a vial of fast-acting poison, carefully prepared by her own hand. In fact, ancient writers say Cleopatra ran experiments with toxins on prisoners, testing which ones killed quickly, which ones tortured, and which ones left a dignified look on the body. It sounds morbid, but in her world, poison was part of the royal survival kit. Beyond the palace walls, poisons also had a ritual role. Egyptians believed that sickness often came from spirits or curses, so priests and healers created protective brews, mixtures of herbs, resins, and minerals designed to keep evil at bay. Some of these were harmless incense. Others, well, let's just say if the evil spirit didn't leave, the patient might. But hey, either way, problem solved. Here's where it gets interesting. For Egyptians, the line between medicine, magic, and poison didn't really exist. It was all the same thing. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts in the world, lists over 800 recipes for healing. Some of them sound reasonable: garlic for infections, honey for wounds. Others, ground up crocodile dung for birth control. You can see how trial and error could take a dangerous turn. One dose too strong, and suddenly your treatment becomes your funeral. Poison also seeped into mythology. The goddess Isis, for example, was said to have poisoned the sun god Ra to force him to reveal his secret name. She mixed spit and dirt into a snake, then used its venom against him. Even gods weren't safe from toxins in Egyptian imagination. If poison could humble Ra, imagine what it could do to a rival general. So, was Egypt the birthplace of systematic poisoning? Maybe not the first, but definitely one of the boldest. They experimented, they recorded, they treated poison almost like a science, and also like a religion. And because Egypt's culture was so influential, this knowledge trickled outward. Greeks, Romans, Persians, they all picked up pieces of the Egyptian playbook. What's fascinating is how ordinary poison seemed in daily Egyptian life. Farmers had to guard against snakes and scorpions, so they collected remedies, and in the process, they learned what didn't cure. Soldiers dipped weapons in venom. Healers mixed herbs that could kill if mismeasured.
Even cosmetics, like the iconic kohl eyeliner, were made with lead and other toxic minerals. Ancient Egyptian beauty came with a side of heavy metal poisoning. Cleopatra's smoky eye might have been iconic, but also a little radioactive. And yet the Egyptians thrived. Their poisons weren't just about death. They symbolized control over nature, harnessing the dangerous to protect, to heal, and, yes, sometimes to eliminate rivals. Poison was part of their worldview, a reminder that life and death could be decided by something as small as a vial of oil hidden in the folds of a robe. It's easy to look back and imagine Egypt as golden statues and desert sunsets, but beneath the glamour, there was paranoia. Every feast could be a trap, every cure could double as a curse. Behind the painted tomb walls, in jars and scrolls, Egypt left behind not only its vision of immortality, but the recipes for some of history's earliest deadly concoctions. And when those recipes spread, other civilizations took them and ran. If Egypt planted the seeds, the Greeks turned them into philosophy, the Romans into politics, and the rest of the world into legend. So as we leave the sands of the Nile and step into Greece, keep one thought in mind. Poison didn't just belong to assassins in dark alleys. It belonged to kings, queens, healers, and even gods. It was written into their medicine, their myths, their history, and sometimes their dinners.
When it comes to poisons, the Greeks didn't just experiment, they philosophized about it. If Egypt gave the world the recipes, Greece gave us the theater. And boy, did they know how to make poison dramatic. The star of this chapter? Hemlock, a plain-looking plant with tiny white flowers. Nothing fancy, nothing flashy, but in ancient Greece, this modest weed was basically the state's official executioner. Forget swords, forget gallows. If the court decided you were guilty, they didn't throw you in jail. They handed you a cup of hemlock tea and said, "Drink up, buddy." And people did, because refusing was pointless. The drink was the law. The most famous case, of course, is Socrates. You probably remember him, the philosopher who asked too many questions. The man loved poking holes in people's beliefs, which was fun for him, but not so fun for the powerful folks in Athens. Eventually, they slapped him with charges of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods. Translation? You're annoying and we want you gone. His punishment? A nice tall glass of hemlock. Now, Socrates could have escaped. His students begged him to run away, to hide, to live out his life somewhere safe. But nope. He insisted on obeying the law, even if the law was trying to kill him. So there he sat in prison, calmly sipping his poison like it was an evening cup of chamomile. According to Plato, Socrates even joked a little on the way out. That's peak philosopher energy, dropping wisdom while dying from a state-sponsored plant smoothie. But Socrates wasn't the only one. Hemlock executions were surprisingly common. It was seen as a clean method. No blood, no public spectacle, just a quiet fade-out. The poison worked by paralyzing your muscles, starting with your legs, then moving up your body. Eventually, it reached your lungs. You suffocated, but slowly, with enough time to have a final conversation or a few regrets. Kind of grim, but for the Greeks, it was civilized.
And let's not forget Homer's Odyssey. Circe, the enchantress, used potions to transform Odysseus's men into pigs. Poison here wasn't about killing, it was about control, domination, reshaping reality itself. To the Greeks, a potion could be medicine, magic, or murder. Sometimes all three it was. Meanwhile, in real life, Greek doctors were experimenting with the same plants. Hippocrates, the do no harm guy, actually studied poisons. He recommended small doses of hemlock to relieve pain and calm spasms. That's right, the same plant that killed Socrates was also prescribed as medicine. Ancient pharmacy was basically a gamble.
The right amount healed you, the wrong amount sent you to Hades. Greek soldiers, too, dabbled in the dark arts. They poisoned enemy wells, smeared toxins on arrows, and experimented with deadly concoctions during wartime. But it wasn't considered honorable. Greeks valued open battle, face-to-face combat. Poison felt sneaky, unheroic. So while they used it, they often pretended not to. It was the battlefield's dirty little secret. What's fascinating is how the Greeks thought about poison, philosophically. To them, poison wasn't just a substance, it was a concept. The Greek word pharmakon could mean both remedy and poison. Same word, two opposite meanings. That shows how blurry the line was. Medicine and poison were basically twins, separated only by dosage. A little could save you, a lot could end you. Sound familiar? That's still how modern drugs work. This duality fascinated Greek thinkers. Plato and Aristotle wrote about it, treating poison as both natural and supernatural. Was it a curse from the gods, or just part of nature's toolbox? For the Greeks, poison forced big questions. What's justice? What's fate? What's the right way to die? And poison had another role in Greek culture. It was the great equalizer. Kings, warriors, philosophers, even gods in myths, no one was safe from a deadly sip. You could be the strongest man in the world, but one drop of the wrong brew and down you'd go. It made people uneasy, sure, but also fascinated. The legacy of Greek poison culture is huge. Their medical experiments laid the groundwork for pharmacology. Their myths gave us timeless stories of betrayal and power. And their executions, like that of Socrates, turned poison into a stage for philosophy. Death wasn't just death, it was a statement. Think about it. Socrates dying by hemlock wasn't just a punishment. It became a symbol of truth, of sticking to your principles, even when the world turns against you. Poison became the ink that wrote one of philosophy's most powerful chapters. So when we look back at Greece, we don't just see marble temples and Olympic games. We see a culture that took poison seriously, as medicine, as metaphor, and as a mirror of life's fragility. Egypt may have brewed the first elixirs, but the Greeks gave poison its story. They turned it into law, legend, and legacy. And from there, it was only a matter of time before the Romans picked up the cup and raised it higher, adding even more drama.
If the Greeks gave poison a stage, the Romans turned it into a full-blown soap opera. Think of it this way. In Greece, poison was about philosophy and tragedy. In Rome, it was about power, scandal, and palace drama that would put today's reality TV to shame. Rome wasn't shy about killing, period. Gladiator fights, public executions, wars stretching from Britain to the Middle East, they loved a good spectacle. But poison? Poison was different. It was private, sneaky, and perfect for the ambitious few who wanted power without swinging a sword. It was the weapon of choice for politicians, emperors, and their families who couldn't quite trust each other. Let's start with one of the most infamous poison clubs in Roman history, the Lex Cornelia de Siccaris et Veneficis. Translation: the Cornelian Law on Assassins and Poisoners. Introduced in 82 BCE by the dictator Sulla, this law was Rome basically admitting, okay, poison has become a serious problem, we need rules. Imagine a society so obsessed with poisoning that they had to draft anti-poison legislation. And yet, despite the law, poison use only grew. Classic Rome. Make a law, then ignore it when it's inconvenient. One of the earliest poison scandals was the so-called poisoning epidemic in 331 BCE. According to legend, a huge number of Roman women were accused of secretly poisoning their husbands. Livy, the historian, claimed that more than 100 women were put on trial in a single day. Some sources say it was mass hysteria, others say it was a conspiracy gone wrong. Either way, it cemented poison's reputation in Rome as a tool of betrayal within the family. But the real masters of poison were in the imperial palace. Take Livia Drusilla, wife of Emperor Augustus. Roman gossip painted her as a kind of ancient black widow. Rumor had it she poisoned rivals left and right to make sure her son Tiberius became emperor. Now, historians debate if that's true or just sexist smear campaigning, but the fact that Romans believed it tells us how deep poison paranoia ran. Then came Emperor Claudius. Poor guy. Claudius wasn't exactly the image of a strong emperor. He limped, he stuttered, and he wasn't the most popular choice. But he managed to rule for 13 years, until he married Agrippina the Younger. Agrippina was ambitious, cunning, and allegedly very good with a jar of poison. The story goes that she slipped Claudius a poisoned mushroom at dinner. He ate it, got violently sick, and, depending on which historian you believe, was either finished off by poison-soaked feathers down his throat or by another spiked dish later on. Either way, Claudius was gone, and Agrippina's son Nero was emperor. And speaking of Nero, wow, this guy was Rome's drama king, musician, actor, arsonist, allegedly, and, yes, poison fan. Nero was paranoid and ruthless, and he leaned heavily on his personal poison expert, a woman named Locusta. Locusta wasn't just any poisoner, she was a professional, one of the most notorious in history. Convicted of murder, she should have been executed, but instead she was recruited to the imperial court. Her job? Supply deadly concoctions on demand. Locusta is said to have prepared the poison that killed Emperor Claudius. She also helped Nero eliminate his own brother Britannicus, who was seen as a threat to the throne. According to stories, Britannicus's drink was switched at dinner, and when he collapsed gasping for air, Nero casually told guests it was just an epileptic fit. Imagine that level of cold-blooded lying. Britannicus was dead within minutes, and Locusta had secured her place as Rome's queen of toxins.
Nero rewarded her with wealth, land, and even students to train. Yes, Rome had a literal poison school, courtesy of Locusta. You can't make this up. Students learned how to prepare, disguise, and administer lethal brews. In a twisted way, it was one of the first organized institutions of toxicology. But Rome's poison problem didn't stop with emperors. It trickled down to politics, rivalries, and everyday grudges. Senators poisoned each other. Wives poisoned husbands. Slaves were accused of poisoning masters. And because so many poisons were plant-based and hard to trace, suspicion was everywhere. Someone died suddenly? Probably poison. Got stomach pains? Must be poison. It became the go-to explanation for almost any mysterious death. Of course, not every poisoning rumor was true. Roman historians loved drama almost as much as the emperors did. Suetonius, Tacitus, Cassius Dio, they all spiced up their histories with juicy tales of murder and betrayal. And poison was the perfect storytelling device. It explained power shifts, it added suspense, and it turned political rivalries into thrillers. Whether or not Agrippina actually poisoned Claudius, the story itself became legend. But here's the thing. Poison in Rome wasn't just about murder. Like the Greeks, Romans also used poison in medicine. Carefully, of course. Doctors experimented with tiny doses of deadly substances for treatments. Arsenic, hemlock, aconite, all dangerous, but in the right amount, they were thought to cure everything from joint pain to fevers. Once again, the line between healing and killing was razor thin. So, what do we take away from Rome's love affair with poison? For one, it shows how fragile power was, even at the top. Emperors had armies, palaces, and wealth beyond imagination, but a single sip of the wrong wine could topple them. Poison was the ultimate equalizer. It made the mighty just as vulnerable as the ordinary citizen. It also shows how much Romans loved a good story. Even if half the poison tales are exaggerated, they tell us about Roman culture, the paranoia, the ambition, the obsession with power. Poison wasn't just a chemical, it was a symbol of hidden threats, of trust betrayed, of ambition taken too far. By the time the Roman Empire began to crumble, poison had already seeped deep into its mythology. Locusta became the poster child for female poisoners in Western history. Roman gossip about black widows and deadly feasts shaped how later generations imagined poisoners in medieval courts and beyond. Rome didn't just use poison. Rome gave poison its drama, its glamour, and its reputation as the silent weapon of the ambitious. And as the empire fell, poison didn't vanish. It traveled into the hands of medieval queens, assassins, and spies. But before we get there, the story takes a darker turn, with one particular family that could outpoison even the Romans. Spoiler, it's the Borgias, and they'll make Nero look like an amateur.